Hello everyone and welcome to this TU-Automotive webinar covering automotive cybersecurity. My name is Annie Redaway from TU-Automotive. I'll be hosting today's webinar. As cars are increasingly reliant on connectivity and software, the automotive industry needs to design secure end-to-end systems that are safe, secure and reliable. Today our expert panelists will discuss where we are today with this topic and what we need to do to prepare for the expansive attack surfaces posed by developments such as smart cities and autonomous vehicles. First, I'll introduce and thank our expert moderator and panelists, Jeffrey Massimilla, Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer, Product Cybersecurity at General Motors, Faye Francy, Executive Director at the Auto-ISAC, Corey Thuen, Senior Security Consultant at IOActive, and our moderator, Alex Oyler, Senior Specialist of Connected Car at SPD North America. Today's webinar will be interactive, so after we've heard from our speakers, I'll be asking you, the audience, to cast your vote on some poll questions. You'll also have the chance to ask some questions directly of our speakers. Just write in using the GoTo interface, and time permitting, we can address those. Just to let you know, we'll be sending around a recording of today's webinar to all those who have registered, and you can expect to receive it early next week. But you've heard enough from me, so I'd like to hand over to our moderator, Alex Oyler, who will introduce the topic.
Well, thank you, Annie, for the great introduction. And on behalf of Faye, Corey, and Jeff, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on automotive cybersecurity. I hope you're all as excited as I am to discuss this hyper-relevant topic. We have some of the best in the business on today's panel, each ready to share their extensive knowledge on cybersecurity with the greater automotive community. As Annie mentioned, we've prepared some talking points to jump right into, but if you have a question, we're reserving time at the end for Q&A, so please don't hesitate to submit it. We've already met the panelists, so let's jump right into the State of the Union, so to speak. Here, everyone will be giving their perspective on the state of the industry within the context of cybersecurity, looking at its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Let's start with Jeff at GM. Jeff, can you give yourself a brief introduction and what the state of cybersecurity is from your perspective within an OEM?
Absolutely, Alex. Thank you. As was stated, I'm Jeff Massimilla. I'm the Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer at General Motors. So my responsibility is the end-to-end cybersecurity posture and capability for all of our products and connected services. So getting to your question, Alex, I think the state of the industry is actually very positive and optimistic. If you look at kind of what the automotive industry has done together to come together to form the Auto-ISAC and what's happening in the Auto-ISAC, which Faye, I'm sure we'll get to here, since we have our executive director on the panel, it's really exciting. It's a great opportunity for the auto industry still, and we've said this for a while, to really get in front of this problem before it manifests itself in fielded issues, which other industries didn't have the opportunity to. But getting specifically to an OEM, to General Motors, from our perspective, safety and security of our customers is our highest priority. So with that being said, we have a very well-funded and a very well-resourced organization that has both visibility and engagement at the highest levels of our company. So when we take a risk-based approach within our organization, we're applying the controls that are necessary from a defensive posture, from a monitoring and detection and a response capability throughout our connected ecosystem. And we're bringing in things like coordinated disclosure programs to work with researchers, collaborations on the external, like with IOActive here on the call. I'm working with partners like them to help make sure our environment is secured appropriately, and training and awareness and supply chain security and all the elements like that. So I'm sure I'll have more of a chance later to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. It's certainly great to see how active General Motors has been in the cybersecurity community with the pioneering of OnStar. I think a lot of people in the industry look towards General Motors as a benchmark, and having as much publicity as GM does within the context of cybersecurity sets a nice trend for the rest of the automotive cybersecurity community to follow. I'll get to Faye in just a second, but I want to talk to Corey first. Corey, can you give yourself a brief introduction? And also you have the opportunity to see the gory details of the day-to-day evolution of threats to the automotive ecosystem. So after that introduction, can you sort of give us your thoughts on the state of the industry as well?
Yeah, sure. So for people who might not be aware, my job at IOActive as a senior security consultant, which isn't exactly the best title for conveying what we do, but we primarily our job is to take the approach from the bad guy perspective. We're a white hat hacking firm, and so we take components and test them and figure out how the bad guys would get in. And so that way we can shore up those vulnerabilities, get the patches, and make the technology more resilient to cybersecurity, and also from a safety perspective, and privacy as well. And so we work with various OEM suppliers to work on that, not just in the auto space, but also in the smart cities, smart grid, power stuff embedded, and then all the way up to just general web stuff as well. But yeah, so my job there is primarily in the embedded space, and I've been doing automotive research for the last while. And to segue into the actual question, it's interesting to see industries approach cybersecurity who haven't necessarily had to deal in that space before. So I mentioned that I spent a lot of time in the industrial control system space, and they went through the same sort of thing as people started connecting power grids together, making smart cities. You're connecting a bunch of stuff that's never been connected before, and we're doing the same thing with cars now. I mean, some of the coolest technology in the world is being used in vehicles with autonomous driving, with all the VDAC stuff. It's awesome technology, but sort of the curse of my job is when I see new technology, I have to take a cynical approach and say, oh no, we're adding a bunch of new connections, we're adding a bunch more complexity to these systems, and I know that every time you add complexity, you add vulnerability. It is inherent because bugs always occur. It's not a matter of trying to eliminate them, but it is a matter of trying to identify the risk, identify your key targets that a bad guy might go after, your avenues of attack, that threat model, and then responding to that. And I think so far, the auto industry was a little slow to get started, in my personal opinion, but I think the last year or two has been pretty great, actually. They're coming around. We've got great programs that are being stood up by Jeffrey, and the ISAC is a great example of just seeing this cybersecurity problem, identifying that it's a problem, and sort of moving forward from this perspective. And that's probably it for now from me.
Corey, you've transitioned perfectly for me. So that's the perfect transition to get an introduction from Faye. So Faye, you get a unique 360-degree view of industry collaboration in your role as Executive Director for the Automotive Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or ISAC for short. What's your take on the state of automotive cybersecurity, and can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and your expertise? Hey, are you there?
Yes, good morning. I'm sorry.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was a very kind introduction. And let me go a little bit into my background. I actually am not an automotive expert, but rather more aviation. And I spent the last 20 years working at the Boeing company. And my last job there was to stand up an aviation ISAC. So I got to meet the automotive guys while they were trying to stand up, and worked with them a little bit and sharing some of the things that we had done in aviation. And I was able to meet Jeff, who has done an absolutely fabulous job as one of our officers for the Auto-ISAC in the stand-up. So I really want to recognize the hard work that he has done in particular, and GM overall, as well as many of the other folks that are on the board. We see that from the last couple of decades that automotive manufacturers have really tempted us, our imaginations, with great innovations, great designs, engineering, luxury features, warm starts on cold days, right? Tantalizing possibilities of things to come with autonomous vehicles and so forth. And with that comes that interconnectedness, and that is the challenge of where we are today. We have arrived at that era of connected vehicles and autonomy, which is really amazing. It's going to change all of our lives. But of course, with that comes other things, which are some of the risks associated with that interconnectedness. These incredible innovations, along with the fusion of wireless architectures and what I call automotive brilliance to give us all these great features, really now requires us to really look at that cybersecurity space and how we handle it. Just look at the fact that we all want to have our phones in our cars and driving, of course, hands-free, but the privacy of those phones, you know, are they at risk today, right? So looking at all of that as a full system of systems is really where we are and where the ISAC is, of course, focused on. I'm really amazed coming into automotive from aviation when I learned that in the car, which is much smaller than an airplane, that there are hundreds of millions of lines of code. And we had about, you know, much less than that, like in the 787 and on a fighter jet, you know, like more like 20 million lines of code. So that just shows you the complexity of what the automotive industry has done today. And those efficiencies that we all want are fantastic. But again, that complexity now requires us to really take a look at the vulnerabilities that are out there and what the impacts can be. And so given the demonstrable amount of vulnerabilities in today's world, the auto industry recognized this and recognized that they needed to come together to address the issue to ensure the safety of the public and the efficacy of the transportation system overall. So that strong commitment and their legacy to safety engineering and what consumers really want from them, they recognized they needed to come together. Today's technology in this IoT world continues to move and advance us in such ways that really all of us need to be at this collective table. So understanding that and coming together to work as an industry to collaborate and to cooperate across the industry is the imperative in the mission space of the Auto-ISAC. I'm really, really honored to be here with the automotive group as we start this journey. Thank you.
Faye, that was a great introduction, and I'd actually like to stick on this point for just a couple of minutes. You mentioned that you previously worked in the aviation ISAC, and you headed that up for a number of years. I think this brings an incredibly valuable resource to the automotive community in establishing the framework necessary to foster open communication between automotive industry stakeholders and ensuring the highest level of cybersecurity issue prevention and response amongst the key stakeholders. So with your guidance, the Auto-ISAC over the past couple of months has been expanding in members, activity, and initiatives on a daily basis. For the people listening who aren't familiar with the ISAC, can you briefly explain how it works and who's involved?
Certainly. So we have today 15 OEMs and 18 suppliers. So a good, robust group. We've just agreed recently to bring in trucking and commercial vehicles, so carriers and fleets. So we will be growing quite a bit. This is our year to really get ready for that growth, and that will provide us a really great view of the full ecosystem. The ISACs are really a collaboration mission space, right? So we come together as the community. And what we've learned in other ISACs is the best data is the data that each of the individuals, companies see, right? So they know their product better than anyone else. They know what their ins and outs are, they know their designs, and as they see things and recognize that there are potential issues, then they come together to help share that. Now, of course, they're all competitors, so the number one criteria is that they can submit things to us anonymously. So we have an intelligence coordinator that will work with each of the members specifically one-on-one if needed to really anonymize the data and information and then share that across the broader community. We know from other industries and from other cybersecurity events that these threat actors, they start knocking on one door, but they'll go to the next and the next and the next until they get in. So one company's detection can equal another company's prevention. And this is really important to maintain the health of the industry and to really help and educate each other and to provide that shared situational awareness across the full community. It's kind of like crowdsourcing, if you will. So we are helping each other by default, right, and helping to work through the mitigations. And folks like Corey and what IOActive does, they also bring an element of information to us and work together in a meaningful and a positive way from a security research perspective. So we're developing a partnership with folks like Corey, with IOActive, and with others, where we're going to also work with the community to understand what they're doing, what they're seeing, and bringing that also in for our community to review and to deal with that. So I'll just stop there. Did I answer your question?
Yes, perfectly. And actually, that brings to a nice segue to Jeff, because as Jeff mentioned earlier, he's deeply involved in the ISAC as well, and I know that you two work on a weekly basis in ensuring that the ISAC is used in an effective manner to share this information and respond to threats. So can you talk a little bit, Jeff, about how the ISAC has benefited your organization and how you work within it as an OEM?
Absolutely, Alex. And I'd actually say, as Faye knows, it's probably more like a daily basis or multiple times a day rather than weekly. But that's an excellent thing, because the ISAC is really maturing here very quickly, and there's a lot of great work from all the OEMs that sit on the board and sit on the executive committee to really get this thing going, as well as our suppliers and strategic partners on our affiliate board. So really, really great work by everybody. But, you know, I think the ISAC is excellent. It's an excellent tool that really forces maturity, I think, in every organization that's participating in it. And you know, there's a varying maturity level, I think, in every industry relative to cybersecurity, and even in every organization within an industry relative to cybersecurity. And I just a couple of ways in which I think this manifests itself is, you know, the information sharing that Faye talked about. So the vulnerability and threat intelligence, really the way that things are, the ISAC is set up to be most effective. It really forces, I think, organizations to really look at what they're seeing inside their environment. And so, I mean, General Motors has been very outward and said, you know, we don't view cybersecurity as a competitive advantage. We view it as a cost of doing business. And we view it as an industry problem. And none of us can benefit from one OEM or one supplier with many OEMs having major vulnerabilities, because it's really hard for a person then to stand up and say, we're good in this space, because then you're a target immediately following. So it really forces you to look at what you're learning in your environment and decide how and when you can share it. I mean, from an internal perspective, you know, we look at anonymous sharing as excellent, but we also look at sharing with attribution as even more important, because sharing with attribution allows other automakers to come to you and say, really, what did you learn? We didn't totally understand. How did you address it? And if it's appropriate to do so, you know, that drives a level of maturity and forces you to take action inside. I think the second part of that is around the best practices effort. And I know Faye didn't touch on that yet, but I'm not sure if she will. But at a high level, you know, the auto industry has come together and said, we're going to create best practices in the area of cybersecurity. And when you have all these organizations sitting together, the maturity level of the overall industry just drives up very, very quickly. And the reason that is because no one can sit in that environment, no one entity can sit in that environment and say that maybe an element of a best practice isn't a good idea to put in the best practice because it's hard to do. Because everybody else would say, well, it doesn't matter that it's hard to do. Best practices are aspirational. We need to go off and do the right thing. But what it allows us to do is say, yeah, that is really hard to do. So let's, as an industry, figure out a way to get that done, and we can begin to work with our partners, you know, to find those solutions to really achieve the best practices that are written, maybe at this time to be aspirational in some aspects, but in other ways they're written that we can, you know, meet them today as well. So I think it's a really, really good tool, and I think it's been really effective in the, you know, just over a year that we've been up and running, which is pretty amazing.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, that's great insight from the OEM perspective, and obviously involvement of the people like you who are making the decisions and responsible for the cybersecurity of actual consumer products is paramount to the success of the information sharing infrastructure. So at least from the third-party perspective, you know, if it's IOActive or SBD, we're on the outside looking in and working with OEMs and suppliers in enhancing these cybersecurity products. But having that engagement at the OE level is absolutely paramount to ensuring the overall cybersecurity disposition of the industry. And so, Jeff, I'd like to continue on this thread actually from the GM perspective to understand some of the cybersecurity challenges you're dealing with on a daily basis. There have been a number of major acquisitions and development areas over the past few years geared towards OEM cybersecurity programs. Just naming a few off the top: over-the-air updates, ECU-level IDSs, or intrusion detection systems, and IPSs, or intrusion prevention systems, and even security-focused hypervisor products to allow better architectures to be implemented on components in the vehicle. With these developments and additional focus on cybersecurity within the industry as a whole, what sort of technology or processes have you implemented at GM that you can share with us today?
Absolutely, happy to share. You know, and we'll keep this at a high level, but just to talk about maybe some of those elements. You know, as I started off, my organization in product cybersecurity is really that end-to-end cybersecurity posture of our vehicles, products, and connected services. So it really extends from the back office, you know, through our partners who provide connections to our vehicles all the way down to the vehicles themselves. And when you talk about that, you know, I kind of view it as a three-legged stool or a three-pillar process of defensive posture, monitoring and detection, and then incident response. I think there's a lot of capabilities that aren't not necessarily organizational capabilities like governance and policy and training and coordinated disclosure and those things, but actual technical capabilities that you know, go across that entire ecosystem. So, you know, whether you're talking about traditional back office capabilities around firewalls and intrusion detection and prevention systems, or if you're talking about in your partner carriers, ways in which you might have closed user groups, or you know, whitelisting and blacklisting of certain numbers and things that can access your vehicles, or down to the vehicle themselves. And you mentioned a few of them there, but even, you know, just the things that I think we, you know, in collaboration with many other industries that have faced this challenge and have a similar challenge because they have a connected ecosystem, you know, the use of digital signatures and software to make sure that your software is only verified by you and your controllers won't accept software that isn't. The use of, you know, standard encryption and virtual private networks within your vehicles. You know, the implementation of firewalls or gateways within your vehicles, all the way down to you know, intrusion detection and prevention, message authentication, so the authentication of critical messages, safety critical messages, and a whole host of other things that we're continuing to deploy, have deployed, and continue to deploy in our vehicle ecosystem. I think the other side of that is this whole monitoring, detection, and response. And we talked about IDS and IPS on vehicles, but you know, there's also a lot of data that we can get out of our partner carriers and our IT systems that we can look at in coordination with data that's coming off the vehicle, which can help us, A, make good decisions on what's going on, but B, you know, give us more insight into that ecosystem as well. And then the response capability, I think, is, you know, the probably as important, if not the most important, third leg of that stool, so that when you do know that something's happening in your environment from any of the data feeds that might be coming in, what action can you take? And you know, you talked about OTA. That's obviously one way to patch maybe vulnerabilities that you have in that ecosystem. It could be all the way down to, it could be server patching and things like that. It could be all the way to the point that you need to disconnect your vehicles for a period of time. So from an incident response perspective, you know, we work with our partners who provide connections to our vehicles to make sure we have that capability at hand at any moment in time that we need to use it. So I think it's very broad-based, and I know I really hit a lot at a very high level and not very detailed, but hopefully that provided some insight into how we look at it.
You know, Jeff, it's like each one of those topics is an entire hour webinar on its own, so I certainly appreciate the high-level overview.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, and that's really nice insight on some of the things that the automotive industry is implementing in today's world, but we also want to take a look towards the future, because cybersecurity and the threats evolve every single day. And just because you launch something that is probably relatively robust in the status quo doesn't mean that 2 years from now it won't be completely obsolete and hackable. So, Corey, I'd like to hear from you here. Can you give us a few thoughts on where some of the newer threats will be over the coming few years, and how the industry can respond to those?
Yes. So it's It's an interesting thing to think about, and I like the title of it, talking about the evolution of cybersecurity in the automotive space and how that's going to go, because the newer technologies are very interesting, and there's sort of multiple ways that you approach the problem of trying to make a given thing secure, especially when we're talking about the future and new technology. And I think there's been some pretty good work in academia on the side of trying to make sure that we're thinking about how these systems are designed in the beginning. There's been a lot of work on the security, privacy aspects, to V2X technology, to the DSRC, and trying to make sure that it's resistant to jamming and from a theoretical perspective, trying to make sure all that works. And that work is great. That helps us make sure that we start on the right path when we start implementing things. But where I sit and where my expertise and we at IOActive sit is when we get into the implementation phase. So when we have to take the idea for the technology, the standards, and then actually turn them into something usable. And that's where it's very easy to stumble, unfortunately, because that's where you start to introduce bugs, where the human aspect comes a lot more into effect, because these are people building these things. Until we get to Skynet, where the machines can build themselves, but then all the people are dead, so that's probably not an ideal to shoot for either. Instead, we're going to focus on trying to make sure that when you're implementing these things that you're thinking about security at the beginning. And I think historically that hasn't been the case. But moving forward, I have a better outlook for the future, because we are starting to incorporate cybersecurity planning, testing, assessments into the actual implementation and design phases. The OEMs and suppliers are starting to get their own red teams, which is an important part for testing equipment, for testing components and communication technologies on that implementation level, and making sure that, okay, we've got the standard, we've got the spec, let's make sure that we're building to spec and that it works. I think my favorite quote on this side is, I try and say this almost every time I speak, because I think it's so amazing, from Dr. Eugene Spafford, Spaff at Purdue, who says a system is good if it does what it's supposed to do, and secure if it doesn't do anything else. And making sure that when we're building these systems, that we're focusing on the good. That's usually the entire focus, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do. But then security is making sure that a bad guy can't come in and force it to do something else, or misuse it, or take it over in that way. And so moving forward, the maturity of these programs that we're starting to see is encouraging for this crazy new technology that's going to add attack vectors. It's going to add all kinds of stuff that makes bad guys' lives easier, unfortunately. But when we can start baking that security in, just like Jeff was saying, when you use the industry best practices from a cybersecurity perspective and do things like secure boot, sign your firmware, encrypt your communications, then that attack surface can shrink rapidly. The technology is there to make relatively secure systems. Depending on your threat actor, you're going to be dealing with different resources and different capabilities, but really we're using industry best practices can help shrink that down tremendously to where it can be really difficult to hack into stuff, and I'm encouraged that we're starting to see that. I just had an assessment doing some work on some telematics, and everything was put together. We couldn't get in, which is very rare to not be able to get into stuff. But it's starting to happen more, which is great.
That's really great to hear, Corey. And as I mentioned before, I mean, as a white hat with those projects where you're working on the systems themselves, you get to have a unique perspective into the feasibility of attacks on real production systems. And you get to break some of the coolest technology in the world to boot and get paid to do it. So it's really sort of an envious position. It's really pretty cool. And And from the SBD perspective, we see the development of smart city and V2X technologies, as a quick pivot here, as two of the most attractive opportunities for black hat hackers with nefarious intentions over the coming decade. The financial opportunity, even though ransomware or through avenues even more malicious, could pose a massive threat to public safety, not to mention it could compromise public trust in next generation intelligent transportation systems, including autonomous vehicles. So you've already spoken a little bit about some of the emerging threats, but looking at smart cities specifically, Corey, what is your take on some of the key building blocks to smart cities, such as DSRC and or 5G, as well as roadside units and similar infrastructure? And is the industry doing a good enough job preparing for the expansive attack surface posed by smart city and autonomous vehicle developments?
That is a very fun question because, yeah, like you said, I mean, it is a fun job, but like I mentioned before, it is a bit of a curse because, yeah, when you see new technology, you can't really get excited about it because you think about all the additional attack vectors and problems that's going to cause. But yeah, so we've been talking a lot from the product side and saying, like, yeah, take advantage of the research done by academia, take advantage of the best practices, make sure you get your stuff tested with your internal red teams who look at stuff, make sure you get your stuff tested by independent third-party red teams who are not subject to the same politics, biases, etc. that you can get from an internal team. Having both of those is important. And building your security in from day one on architecture reviews and whatnot when we're talking about this new technology is key. But I think even beyond that, which we haven't discussed so far, and actually I haven't heard very much of really in my circuits doing research and communicating and talking to other people, is more of a holistic cybersecurity approach. And what I mean by that is more on the, so we've got our red team who's going to test stuff. We've got our blue teams, I guess I should specifically mention. The people making the product are responsible for defending the product, which I would probably put Jeff in, and Faye and the Auto-ISAC as well are part of that information sharing blue team, and making sure that you're responding to incidents and vulnerabilities and working on that. But then additionally, there's a concept of hunt teams. And as we're moving forward and automotive just gets bigger and bigger, and there's more and more data generated, and we've got telematics, we've got smart cities, we've got all these systems that talk to each other. The concept of a hunt team is going to be even more important. And if you're unfamiliar with what a hunt team is sort of a more sophisticated blue team with a little bit of red thrown in, that heavily rely on big data and analytics within an organization. So taking and digging through, performing the advanced analytics to identify and hunt attackers, ransomware, if vulnerability gets into your system, and try and identify if that has occurred and when it occurred and how it occurred. Because unfortunately, we're not just talking about our products. Fortunately or unfortunately, there's upsides and downsides, but we're not just talking about the products. We're talking about the organization as a whole. When you have a fleet of vehicles, you not just have to worry about the cybersecurity of an individual vehicle. You have to worry about your back-end infrastructure security. You have to worry about your support, your employees, all the systems that keep the enterprise running are also imperative to making sure that that fleet runs successfully and securely and safely. And so we're talking about the big data from the enterprise, we're talking about the big data from each vehicle itself, the data that they generate when they communicate with the cities. And so hunt teams are going to be something that I think we're going to see more when we're talking about the evolution of cybersecurity as we're moving forward with smart cities and increased connectivity in vehicles. It's going to be more important. And so focusing on building that cybersecurity in the beginning, building a response team to handle incidents when they happen, because it's not an if, it will occur, unfortunately. a bad guy only has to find one way in, and the good guys have to stop all the ways, which is not fair. It's an asymmetric, unfair situation. But we can acknowledge the truth of that and prepare for the future. And I think that's going to be super important as we move forward, is being able to do and handle that.
Great answer, Corey. Really appreciate the information on hunt teams. You know, that's a really important concept for any stakeholder looking at how all of these systems play together and how to prevent or detect these threats to the infrastructure on a daily basis. So we could go on for on that topic for quite a while, but I'd like to pivot now back to Annie. We have a few poll questions that were put out there at the beginning of the webinar, and I think we also have some audience-submitted questions to get to. So Annie, if I can turn it back to you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for contributing to the panel. So we've had some audience questions come in, which is great, so please keep them coming. But in the meantime, we're going to actually give our panelists a bit of a break because we're turning to the audience to get involved. So we'll take a couple of polls just to see a little bit more about who's listening in and get your opinions on what's happening in the industry. I think bring them up on the screen now. So for the first one, I'll give a couple of minutes for people to answer. I think speakers can vote as well. What automotive or transportation ecosystem do you believe to be the most attractive to a hacker with malicious intent? Autonomous vehicles, smart cities, telecommunications or telematics, mobility services, or public transportation?
This is Corey. I guess maybe I'll jump in here first.
Great.
We're
just getting a couple of results in, but
oh, okay.
We'll ask your opinion on the result in a minute. Yeah, let's
I'm just so excited to talk about hackers with malicious intent.
Well, we'll ask your opinion on it in a minute. So it looks like we have a tie here. What do you think then?
Well, actually, so this is very interesting results, because I was almost going to say that those two together, autonomous vehicles and the telecommunications telematics, are almost the same thing when we're discussing this, because really when you're talking about autonomous vehicles, you're not talking about, it changes the paradigm. As we're going to more rideshare and you're talking about a fleet and an autonomous vehicle, there's going to be less people owning vehicles. That might be an opinion of mine personally, but so the telecommunications that happen with those vehicles and the fleet itself is really where it gets scary. I mean, there's an interesting book called The Daemon by Daniel Suarez, I believe is the author's name. But in that book, it's a cyber thriller, and one of the aspects is autonomous vehicles being controlled by hackers with malicious intent, and it's interesting in the different ways you use it. But when you've got that kind of remote, arbitrary code execution and control, then things start to get post-apocalyptic scary pretty fast. From an attacker's perspective, it's always most interesting when you're talking about remote. I mean, that was one of the reasons I got into this in the first place, was because I saw the insurance dongle commercials, and I realized that they were adding cellular communications to the cars, and that seemed like an initial problem to me. Adding those communications and having the cars be able to drive themselves. I mean, who doesn't want to hook an Xbox controller up to a car and drive it around for real? So.
Okay, we've actually had it pointed out by a listener that we have missed something off this. He says the poll is missing today's passenger vehicles, and a lot of hacking is just for stealing expensive vehicles. I guess the vehicles on the road as well is something that we could have put in this too. What do you think?
I'm sorry, Annie. Was it the existing, like the car park, the passenger vehicles that are already out there today?
Yes.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. And actually, just as Jeff with what Corey said, whether you're talking about a telecommunications or telematics-enabled vehicle versus an autonomous vehicle, autonomous vehicle is just a vehicle. It's a connected vehicle with more connections and more things going on. You could even link in mobility services a bit to that, because that's an ecosystem that's most likely going to be enabled, that enables autonomous vehicles. And then any existing vehicle that's on the road, and Corey, I think, brought it up really well. I mean, whether you're talking one that has telematics, I mean, we've had telematics out there for almost 20 years now, over 20 years now, connected vehicles, or just one with a wonderful diagnostic port that is required by regulation, of which then these devices that are being put out by different insurance providers and fleet management companies that creates then that vehicle that's in the car park that maybe wasn't connected originally now becomes part of that connected ecosystem. So I would agree with that input that should be on there, although I don't know, again, if any of autonomous telematics, that option, and even mobility services to an extent are probably almost one and the same.
Okay, thank you for that. I think in the interest of time, we might move on to the third out of our three questions here. We're just getting it up on the screen. So which of the following is the most important activity in the security development lifecycle? Requirements, threat model, design review, penetration test, or incident response? I'll give some time for people to answer. They're all dancing around quite a bit, actually, I think. And we'll close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's pretty even there. Was that what you were looking for, Alex?
Yeah, it's an interesting result, and I think there are quite a few listeners out there who might have seen through the smoke screen of this being a trick question. The obvious, I wouldn't say the obvious answer, but really the answer is that you have to do all of these to have a really holistic security life cycle, and there isn't one single one of these activities which will create a product that is robust to cybersecurity threats. What I would say that one of the biggest pitfalls that I see when working with our clients is that they get 3/4 of the way through the development of a product and they say, well, we should probably test this for security before we go to production with it. And so it's tested and all of these major vulnerabilities are found and there's not enough time or budget to fix it before it goes to production. So you have this giant risk with a product that goes and is being sold to consumers that has to be mitigated, whether it be through some sort of update after the fact, or even a recall in some scenarios. So the key lesson here is that all of these play a critical role in the life cycle, and you can't overemphasize one above any of the others, to be honest.
Well said, Alex.
Yeah.
every single one of these is absolutely critical, from the product cybersecurity organization and General Motors, along with other things that are not listed here that are part of SDLC. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's designed with security in mind. Penetration tests, along with other activities throughout the development cycle, can confirm that you've implemented your security plan well in the product lifecycle. And really, I mean, one that we haven't talked about, but is a very interesting one. You have incident response listed here, but really vulnerability management. So I think it might have been mentioned by Corey early on. Just when you launch a product that's connected, and talking about the future of this, our vehicles are on the road for 10, 11, 12. The average life keeps growing a little bit years after you launch it. And if you think about it, the SDLC process, or secure lifecycle development, is done, 7 years, 6 years maybe, before the last vehicle of a platform is built in the assembly plant, because you assume you build them in the plant for 4 or 5 years once you build the first one. So now you're talking almost a 20-year life cycle, which makes for a huge challenge for everybody on the phone here, no matter what part of the ecosystem that you're involved in.
I'd like to weigh in and just say how smart I think our audience is. They did a great job on this, and in fact, looking at how the numbers actually fell out, obviously knowing that we need to do all of these, But understanding that threat model is so imperative, right? So what are you designing for? What does that look like? And I think that really says it all there. And then followed by the requirements, and then the other activities are very similar. So well done to the audience.
I agree. But they've actually sent in quite a lot more grilling questions as well. I know that. Let me know if we go too far into people's schedules here, but I think we have time for 2 or 3 of them. It's quite hard to choose, actually. One stands out, actually. I hope he doesn't mind me calling out his name, but from a Mr. Charlie Miller. The field of automotive cybersecurity was started by external security researchers from academic and industry. So are they going to be a part of the Auto-ISAC in the future?
Well, I'll take that. So we are developing a partner program, as I had mentioned earlier. And one of the aspects of that partner program, there's going to be different types of partners. We're going to have collaborators, navigators, and strategic partners, and probably other categories we haven't thought of yet. But very clearly, we want to collaborate with the academia, with the white hatters that are out there and that are working together. In fact, NHTSA actually asked us to talk to the VRTC, the Vehicle Research Technology Group out of Ohio as well, and what they're doing in research. DHS Science and Technology also have approached us and want us to work together as far as understanding that type of research and what they're doing, where they're putting their dollars. So it is absolutely critical to work together across the broadest aspects of this community of automotive folks.
Hey, Faye, it's Jeff, if I could add as well. And hello to Charlie out there. Didn't know you were going to be on here. Charlie obviously has been a very critical researcher and showing, a lot of, highlighting a lot of the vulnerability and the need for strong security posture in this connected ecosystem. But I think great answer, Faye, by the way. We've talked a lot as an industry about, how researchers and OEMs or suppliers, whatever it might be, should be interacting. And, I think it's been very well documented in a lot of industries about the importance of coordinated disclosure and really the bug bounty programs and the ability for researchers to work directly with the OEM or the supplier, and obviously it's something that we've embraced, and other automakers have set up programs as well. So I think a really important part of that activity. But Faye, I agree with you as well. It's something we continue to talk about as a board of the Auto-ISAC to figure out, knowing that the primary interface, should be between the researcher and the OEM or the supplier, to which then any research that's found is shared within the Auto-ISAC appropriately, how we can also then engage researchers directly into the ISAC in the right capacity. So I think it's a great question, Charlie, and hopefully we'll talk about that more here as we go forward.
Thank you. Now, do you have time for 1 or 2 more quick questions?
I'm okay till 12:30.
Great.
Honey.
Great. So one interesting one that it seems to kind of run across the industry in general. What are the biggest gaps in the market for automotive cybersecurity? So in terms of what are we missing in terms of skills or capability, and what do we need more of?
I'm happy to answer that from the OEM perspective, but I don't know from the security research perspective. What do you think, Corey?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I mean, this is unfortunately this is not an auto-specific problem. There's a massive shortage of cybersecurity expertise in general. Everybody's trying to hire more people to address this problem. The problem which grew much faster than we could grow our response to it. And so, in terms of what specific skills, I don't know that there's anything. It's a tough thing for me to say to just go and take this training or get the certification and then you'll be able to do cybersecurity. Unfortunately, those programs haven't proven, at least in my opinion, to be the end-all be-all that maybe some people would like them to be. And so, unfortunately, I guess I would say it's going to have to be in organic growth into the areas that we know, and the areas that people are doing their jobs in, and adding cybersecurity onto it. I would encourage people to start. It's a tough thing to get money for, I guess I would say. Cybersecurity is a tough thing to budget for because of cybersecurity being a negative and trying to sell a negative. Something bad might happen, but it might not. And if you spent money on it and it didn't happen, then did you waste that money or did you get a return on it? It's very hard to measure, unfortunately. And so I would say, but the best practices are out there, and the good ideas of where to spend your time and resources are out there. You can take a look at the tremendous transformation that Microsoft went through from their initial stance or position in cybersecurity to where they're at today has been fantastic, and they've published a lot of the lessons that they've learned along the way. That we've talked about the security development lifecycle. But taking advantage of other people's bumps and bruises, I think, is probably, from an automotive perspective, the best way to go forward and to sort of we've been down the road of these high-tech companies understanding cybersecurity and getting into a better posture before. So if we can follow that same path, I think that's probably the best way that we're going to get there. But yeah, I mean, there's a shortage of expertise in general, so. It's a tough problem.
Yeah, probably from the OEM perspective, I mean, one of our biggest challenges is finding the talent that we need for all the roles that we have at any given time. I guarantee I have at least 10 roles available out there publicly looking for talent. So hint, hint, anybody in the audience who's looking for a cybersecurity role that has good talent, we're always looking. But yeah, I think the problem is, like you said, Corey, every industry has a shortage. The universities and armed forces, there's a lot of places you can get this talent, but there's also a problem that a lot of the talent is traditional IT security. Not that that's a bad thing, because IT security is also extremely important. But IT security, along with other elements of security, really translate, and they enable the product ecosystem or the connected ecosystem or the vehicle itself and how that works, but really an understanding of embedded controllers. So it's more about, from our perspective, as much IT security as cyber physical systems. And so I know we work very, very proactively with a lot of universities out there, key partner universities, trying to drive postgraduate and undergraduate curriculum within existing academic programs to really help us. I need as much as I need cybersecurity specific people in my organization, I need software developers and hardware designers that had a number of academic courses and training in the area of designing with security in mind, so that we're really throughout that ecosystem, we're developing things appropriately and then still having the appropriate cybersecurity core capability as well. So I think this is a huge, huge challenge, and one that I think everybody, all the people on this call and this panel and this discussion, if you're working with partner universities talking about your needs, they've been very receptive to us, and we really need that talent to keep coming out of those universities and the armed force agencies and elsewhere.
I'll just contribute one other quick point here. We talked a little bit about smart cities and some of the developments around there. I'm not going to go so far as to say that traditional telematics is solved. Obviously, it's not. But the communication patterns and the understanding of the cybersecurity requirements for traditional telematics has been quite good over the past couple of years, with additional focus on the development life cycle. But I would say that there are a ton of new requirements coming for emerging technologies. V2X communications is a completely different type of communication pattern. For autonomous vehicles, you're introducing fleet and machine learning over different communication networks, which, as mentioned, could be even DSRC and 5G or satellite. There are all sorts of new vectors that are coming into play here. And as Corey mentioned, it's sort of an organic growth. When these technologies are first introduced, it's going to pose a much more attractive attack surface for a threat actor, because there will be it likely will just have less rigor in the existing ecosystem in terms of testing it and maturing the technology over time. So paying very close attention and having the incident response in place to be able to both detect and prevent attacks to that type of infrastructure will be crucial over the coming years, in my estimation. So, Annie, I think you had a segue to wrap up.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, we've had a lot of great questions in, but we are almost out of time, so I will wrap things up. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for giving their time today and helping to share the insight with everyone that has tuned in. Many of the questions we've addressed today, along with other topics in the connected car and autonomous vehicle industry, will be explored further at the TU-Automotive Detroit Conference and Exhibition on June 7th and 8th in Novi, Michigan. You may actually be able to meet some of our panelists in person as well. For more information and the full agenda, please visit the website. The address is on your screen. But for now, on behalf of TU-Automotive, thank you ever so much to our speakers, Alex, Faye, Jeff, and Corey. Thank you all very much for listening. I'll email you on Monday with the audio recording for this webinar. Please feel free to share it. And have a good weekend. In London, we're off to the pub.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.